Ren, thank you so much. So, usually when we pick up where we left off for a presentation, you don't expect the entire environment to do that, including the weather. So, really glad to see everyone's here today. Absolutely gorgeous right now, right? But thank you all for being here. I think for those of you who've kind of heard me speak before, I'll just share a couple of remarks about volunteers here in a moment. First, just want to stop and thank our staff who really kind of helped us kind of put today together on our end. So Emily has just done an amazing job with this. Laura's right around the corner, so all of our logistics staff and Gloria. And so really just if y'all would help me real quick to thank the economic development staff for So I think what I've maybe shared with y'all before is a quick recap. I've been in economic development a long time, 25 years or so, kind of hard to believe. Started when I was 5, I guess. When I was a little like what it said, when I was a baby economic developer. Really what I've noticed across 3 different states, I've worked at the state level, the local level, the regional level, and the one thing that's consistent is economic development does not happen without volunteers. You are important. I mean, since my very first role in economic development, I've been working with leadership development programs just like this one, Leadership Lafayette and Junior Leadership Lafayette. And these are important parts of the building blocks of our community. You look at all the folks who serve in boards and commissions and kind of behind the scenes to help make things happen. We've got a lot of really talented people on staff, and this is never ever meant to take anything away from them. But there's only so many hours in the day, there's only so much willpower, there's only so much political will, and sometimes knowledge and experience. And so we really count on folks to do that from the volunteers perspective. So thank you for investing your time and your efforts, and thank your employers for doing that. I want to thank Ren for all of her work helping to organize this day, along with, I'm trying to remember real quick if, Lauren, are you one of the organizers too? Where'd you go? You're one of the organizers too? And of course, Shanna, one of our board members. So thank y'all so much for hosting it here. I think this is exciting. It's been a long time since we had this many people in the room. So I feel like we're having a baby announcement or something like that. Baby shower. Real quick, if you've got any questions, feel free to stop us. Let's make this a little bit conversational. We've got some great content to get to, but I think we've also got a little bit of fill time that we can provide as well. So we tried to create a little bit of a cushion for you there so we don't feel too rushed. Some housekeeping. Of course, I think everybody found the food, so thank you to the Madeline and whoever ordered that. That's wonderful, love that. Restrooms, if you don't know, if you go just right here through this door, there's another door. Men's and women's restrooms are just literally right across the hall. It's called the fast lane to the restroom, so feel free to do that. The door will not be locked, but there'll be a sign on it, so don't be alarmed. You won't have to go back around. You can just come right back through there. So, of course, some waters and all here, so keep yourself hydrated throughout the day. Anything else from our organizers that we should think about from a housekeeping perspective? Nope, all good? All right, wonderful. Well, let's get started here. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit. As you know, I love talking about you and you and you and you, but I love Economic Development Day because I get to talk about me. Not me, but all of us, right? So this is an important part of what we do, is helping y'all to understand more about us so that y'all can be deputized as economic developers to go out and spread the economic gospel of Frisco. So we were created in 1991 by you, the taxpayers. The voters approved an election to dedicate 1/4 of the local sales and use tax in Frisco, dedicated 100% to economic development. At the same time, they also created the Frisco Community Development Corporation, and I'm trying to remember if that's on the schedule after us or before us. We are essentially created to bring jobs to Frisco. And we're going to talk a little bit about how we do that. At the end of the day, there's a lot of great things that we get involved in. You probably see us involved in different events and different activities and programs. You hear about the companies moving to Frisco. And I hope you know that that's an important part of what we do, but there's a lot more that's important as well beyond just the headlines of every single company that's coming. As we say, that's the cool, fun part, right? That a lot of people focus on, but a lot of the real hard work is focused on some other activities that we're going to learn about today. But ultimately, it's about creating the best quality of life for Frisco residents, and we do that by attracting investment, right? By attracting companies that make capital investments that bring equipment and buildings and leases and all that great stuff, and of course, creating great jobs for Frisco residents. One thing I want to sort of kind of stop for a moment, I sort of kind of gave y'all a quick sneak peek if you're fast enough. If you can in here tell me, how would you describe economic development? What is economic development? Cheater.
Grow the city.
What's that?
Just growing the city.
Growing the city, yeah, that's a part of it.
Increase jobs.
What's that?
Job.
Yep, creating jobs, yeah.
Bring more businesses.
Bringing businesses, that's all part of it.
Lessen the tax burden on residents.
That's an important part of it, yes, absolutely. So what y'all are all talking about, it's a part of a process. Economic development, see, people say, oh, you created economic development. It's not a destination, it's ongoing. It's a process. It's the process of activities in order to attract wealth, to bring more revenues to our community. And when we bring money from outside of Frisco, a lot of folks get excited about local retail and services, and we are as well. But if you think about it, the service economy, right? The local retail shops, the dollar that comes in gets circulated multiple times, which really helps a lot of small businesses and even medium and large businesses. It helps the hospitality. That's a really important part. The way that you grow your community truly is to create wealth by attracting wealth, by bringing wealth in. And you do that by recruiting companies called primary employers. And primary employers are essentially the traded sectors, if you want to think about it. Headquarters, technology, research and development, transportation, warehousing. All of those sectors which really have customers outside of Frisco, preferably outside of the state, maybe outside of Texas, outside of the United States. It's the idea that they are exporting their products and services and importing those revenues in. When they import those revenues, they spend those on payroll and other activities, so that's new money coming in. And by the way, once that money comes in, guess what? It then goes into the funnel over and over and over. So if you don't have that external money coming in, it limits the amount of new funding that kind of gets recycled within your community. So this is how our tourism and our service base and our Chamber of Commerce and our economic development, here's why we're all so important kind of working together. We really, as we talked about here, we really focus on attracting jobs. And by attracting jobs, it doesn't necessarily mean just recruiting companies. Attracting jobs can be focused on helping companies in Frisco to create new jobs or to relocate jobs from somewhere else. So we really focus a lot on BRE, business retention and expansion. And so we've got some folks I'm going to introduce here in just a moment, and we're going to talk about their roles. And one of those is on BRE. And of course, that's going to happen, isn't it? Let's see if I can snooze out long enough to get through this. I may have to reboot here. It's always this, right? How many times do we go through this in practice? Of course, improving our product. Anybody want to guess kind of what improving our product means?
Making it more attractive?
Yeah. It's about building a better Frisco. It's about improving our community. It's also about creating the real estate, right? Attracting the right development in order to make sure that we've got places for jobs to be created in. We also spend a lot of time on innovation and technology. There's a couple of exciting events coming up. Dallas Startup Week is having a big kickoff event next week. And they're going to be announcing some really cool stuff here very soon, so stay tuned for that. And then, of course, marketing and promoting the city of Frisco. You'll notice that we are the Economic Development Corporation, and just quick commercial on that. We are a subcomponent unit of the city. We are, I'm essentially the department head for the Department of Economic Development for the city. I'm also the president of a standalone nonprofit corporation, right, that brings in $30 million a year dedicated to what we do. So it's like I'm a nonprofit executive running a $30 million nonprofit. The reality is I report up through, as you're going to see, the city management structure. We have accountability with city council, and so that's what kind of keeps us connected as a single organization. So most of the branding that you see we pushing out no longer talks about Frisco EDC a whole lot. A lot of times we're just talking about Frisco, Texas, because that's what we're selling. We're selling the community, we're selling the product here. All right, we do a big part of this by creating exceptional experiences. One thing our city council likes to do is they want to do everything at the top level, right? It's just creating a culture of excellence. And so we want to generate high quality leads, and we do that by creating these exceptional experiences when people visit, while they're here. We've got to have the right business climate, we've got to have the right product, we've got to have, taking care of our community, make sure it's clean, it's easy to navigate. All the factors that all come together to win the best project, you've got to create exceptional client experience. So a little bit about what we do day to day. We've got incentives, as we've talked about in the past. I don't know if many folks have talked much about this, but I'll kind of refresh it. So for us, we are funded by the sales tax, which we use for administration and operations. But we do use a significant portion of our resources to help win projects, to help get projects over the finish line. So we primarily do performance-based grants for jobs. That's, again, our primary mission is creating jobs. So when a company comes to Frisco, we'll evaluate what the salaries and the wages and how much you're gonna spend on new property and equipment and leases and buildings. And we put all that into a big fancy spreadsheet and economic model, which is a very sophisticated model actually that we've licensed. And then we can determine how we make sure there's a good ROI for the city. And so everything that we do is performance-based. And so the more jobs, the more value, we can create a higher return for the community. So those performance-based grants may be $1,500 per job, and it may be up to $8,000 or $9,000 per job. Just depends upon the project and how much that they're gonna invest, how many jobs they're gonna create. And they may do that over a 2-year period, and they may do that over a 10-year period. So most of our agreements are about 10 years. Infrastructure upgrades, you'll hear us talk about qualified infrastructure. That's basically the public infrastructure part of projects. The water, the roads, the streets, all of the stormwater handling, taking care of all the rainwater that comes through. It's essentially the public utility side of it, so the non-franchise utilities that service a project. It could be streets, generally speaking, in a business district, or it might be specifically tied to a specific building or a company or real estate development, such as Paul Park or the Star. So we'll provide infrastructure grants, usually to more than 25 to 50% of the project, but we've got to, again, make sure that there's a good return on the investment for the taxpayers when we do all these grants. We can help companies with acquiring land, buildings, lease and upgrades. We don't tend to do that as often. We do it from time to time, and we'll do some sales and use tax rebates to kind of help fund some of this stuff. However, for the most part, this is where we're spending most of our time in terms of the direct dollars. I am pleased to say, however, that when we do make investments, we make them really big. So many of you may not know this, but we purchased the land, which is today the 50 acres for the new UNT campus, and that's one of the ways that we support higher education and training in our community. That's one of the functions of what we can do in Frisco. So we can't put money into the ISD, but if the ISD has a program that's tied to our primary employers, we could potentially help with a program that kind of help get a career program going there. But UNT is probably going to expand and add another 50 acres. They're out advocating right now at the legislature for some really exciting projects, and just say stay tuned for that. Marketing and promotional activities. I just want to stop for a moment and talk about this, because a lot of the stuff we talk about day to day is the jobs and the things that you read about in the newspaper. The marketing that goes to soften the market is a whole lot of work. It is a significant portion of our budget, of our time. We've got national campaigns, we've got targeted campaigns, we've got digital media. You're gonna hear about all of that. And right now we've got a one-man show running this, and she's doing a phenomenal job. So can't wait for y'all to kind of hear some of that stuff as well. And then finally, administration and operations, right? We try to keep lean like everyone else. Currently having mauve carpet gets the job done, but we are looking to upgrade our offices. So hopefully next year when y'all come back, we've got some pretty cool space that we can share with y'all in order to help continue to sell Frisco. As we become a global city, we need to make sure that we've got facilities that really not only celebrate Frisco, but showcase Frisco and help CEOs feel like they are comfortable the moment that they walk and arrive in Frisco, that they can see themselves here in our community. So, any questions about how we're spending our dollars here in terms of the economic development funds? No? Okay, great. Love this crowd. we don't have questions about money. We're just going to spend. Just kidding. All right. In terms of the day-to-day services, of course, incentives is a part of it, but then the incentives is only a piece of what we call the site selection process. So if you think about it, all of the work that we're doing, helping companies to create jobs, it's about something called site selection. They're trying to find a building, ultimately, a space that they can lease or purchase or build to put their project in order to, ramp up. What they're trying to do, think about it, every company is profit driven, right? So they're trying to balance corporate risk and their governance strategy with costs. Those are kind of the three pillars that they're leaning at. And right now you start to look at maybe things like environmental, social, and I'm trying to remember what the G is. Governance, yeah, thank you. Yeah, they're looking at those ESG factors, right, and the triple bottom line. So that's becoming a bigger weight more and more. But all of that's a part of site selection. They create this big matrix to determine what are all the site selection factors that are important to drive them to look for a new location. Who are the cities that maybe could help them solve that? And we go through a courting process. We go through an RFP process. And it may be a year, 6 months, 2 months. I've gone 2 years and worked with a company and not known who the company is, and only been on a first name basis with everyone in the company. And that means all the emails we're getting are all confidentially marked as maybe a Gmail or something like that. And they do that because if you think about it, first of all, they probably don't want a lot of their employees to know that they're thinking about making a big change. They don't want that news to leak to their competitors. That could affect their competitive advantage, but also could affect their stock price. So we work day to day in a cloak of confidentiality. If you looked around this office, and I ask you to not, but if you look at all the files around here, you know, most of the projects operate under some level of confidentiality or non-disclosure agreement. So that's one of the reasons why y'all don't hear about most of the projects until they're announced. And it's because this is the way the industry has operated for 30 years, and it really is the same thing, right? When you wouldn't want everyone to know your personal financial information, so companies oftentimes are in that situation as well. If it's a public company, once we do a deal, that information becomes public, but during the reporting process, it remains pretty tight. So we're helping them look for real estate. We're not brokers. We don't advise them like a broker would do it, but we have access to the same tools in order to help them to do the site selection process. So we can help augment that process. We can steer them in the right direction based on certain developments or giving them updates on certain land, things like that. So speaking of which, we can do custom on-site presentations for people who are relocating or help their staff better understand Frisco. This is the room where we sell from, right? This is our pitch room. We've got one more small room on the other side of the building over there, but this is where we do most of our pitches from. We can also do, in addition to the regional briefings, we provide research through the RFI process or RFP process. I don't think Erica's here right now, right? Our researcher, she's gonna be with us in a little bit. But as you might imagine, it's a very data-intensive process, right? They want to understand the rules and the regulations and the safety and the transportation, and they ask a whole lot of information that you can't get off Google. And that's a big part of what we do, is we are information brokers and we're relationship brokers. That's the two most important things that we have as assets to sell Frisco: information and relationships. So many of you have information that's helpful to us on projects. Many of you have relationships that are important to us in the process. And I hope that we can continue to find ways over time to have y'all involved. In terms of city permitting, we don't control it, but sometimes we do help give it a nudge or help direct people to how to go through the permitting process here. We talked about incentives, not just our own incentives, but when someone's maybe looking at state incentives, some of them do require a local match. And some of the incentives will be a 10% match, and we've done a 100% match on some. That big building over there coming up, TIAA, that was one of the biggest Texas Enterprise Fund projects awards this past year. We worked on that project for over 2 years, even through COVID. And that was a significant, that was an $18 million commitment by the governor's office. There's a tremendous amount of political advocacy that we have to do with the governor, the lieutenant governor, the speaker of the house, in some cases the comptroller, and then you're dealing with all the staff. You're dealing with sometimes our lobbyists. You're dealing with our elected officials, our state senators and our House of Representatives leaders, because many of them play a role in advocating for the state to say, hey, this is a good project for Frisco, we want this to happen. So that's, again, an important part of just what happens here. That one little bullet takes a whole lot of energy and time. And then finally, of course, we just talked about actually helping them to physically fill out these state applications. We are a co-applicant and sometimes the primary applicant on an application for state incentives. So anyway, any questions, comments, thoughts, jokes on this?
I'm curious, when maybe you can't divulge which companies, but when you lose,
Yep.
I'm sure it hurts. Maybe you can't say which companies it was, but why do we lose ever with what we have?
So
offered?
we still do lose.
Yeah.
The biggest loss that we cite is Toyota, right? They looked hard in Frisco. They loved Frisco. They loved what was happening in Frisco at the time. But we didn't have the stock. We didn't have those types of mixed-use developments. You know, Feeney had them announced. We didn't have PGA and all the $10 billion halo effect of that. So now that we're starting to really develop that type of momentum, you're seeing all of these companies coming into Frisco because we have the environment. We're fostering the environment. And Gloria's going to talk a little bit about that here in a moment. But today, we're usually losing them because of sublease rates that may be cheaper, that also have amenities in a walkable environment that may be 5 minutes from here. The reality is, companies look for incentives, but that's not why companies choose. They're looking for talent. But if they can find talent here, that same talent pool is available 2 miles across the street, right? Literally a mile maybe down the street. That's the same talent pool. So we have to find ways to really differentiate ourselves as a city. But sometimes they're looking at a short-term lease until they figure out where they want to go long-term. And that might be looking at a sublease that's heavily subsidized, maybe at half the market rate. And so we've lost some projects because of that. So, question back there?
Yeah, while you're bringing in new businesses, what is your strategy of sustainability of the current businesses? Like businesses going on losses, or they need some additional help to sustain their business?
Mhm.
That's one. And the second core question is, since I'm dealing with in my work, what about mergers and acquisitions? If there is a small company in Frisco, but there's a larger company outside want to do an acquisition, then how do you really engage with it?
Great question, and Gloria's gonna talk about some really neat examples, without naming specific companies, of how we target and identify companies that are kind of undergoing M&A activity, and how we can try to find ways to help support them. Y'all can cover that one a little bit later, right?
You're ready to.
Great, all right, I'm super excited for them to talk about that one. Hold on, you asked another question I didn't answer, and that was, you talked about how do we help the existing companies in sustainability. So we are gonna talk about our business retention and expansion program here in a little bit. Peyton Capps is gonna lead that conversation. But I wanna say very clearly, if a company is not financially doing well, our job is to not plug the hole in the bucket, right? We don't save companies by plugging a financial gap. If a company has to have public financial support to be successful, that's not a good investment for taxpayer dollars, right? What we would rather do is find ways of connecting them with prospective customers. Maybe there's a permitting issue that's delaying the project, that they can't generate enough revenues, or maybe there's another way that we can help them through other relationships that we've got. But our board, and I'll tell you, so she can tell you, we've got a very extensive due diligence process, even for startups and early stage companies. And we ask, can your project sustain? I just called someone just a few days ago, someone who's got a really exciting project for Frisco. I know I keep talking about exciting, but really is, everything's just so exciting. Word of the day, exciting. Check your bingo card. But we do have a really exciting project, and I told them, I said, we've got a lot of confidence in you, in your leadership, in the project. But if the project is not financially viable without public incentives, it's not a good project. And we have a term for that in economic development. It's called a dog, right? If it's a dog project, you really don't want to put money behind it, because the only thing you're doing is throwing money away. But there's other ways that we can help otherwise in the development process or with companies. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Is that good enough for now?
Thank you.
Good, all right. Another question right here?
Yeah, so you mentioned ESG, and a lot of the public companies, and now mine included, are really investing a lot of dollars there, because investors are not only looking at your credit rating, but now your ESG rating. So is Frisco putting any effort behind that? Is there an ESG rating for Frisco?
So I don't know about the fact that we're being intentional around ESG with like a policy specifically, but literally was it this morning? I sent a note to the staff, and I sent an article to your point, and I said, this is becoming more and more important to companies. As we are targeting companies, we need to be looking at the opportunities for which companies are really paying attention to ESG, because we have a lot to offer in Frisco that's linked to that. One example is Southstone Yards. This is going to be one of the most green LEED certified projects, and it's going to help a lot of companies to accelerate their ESG goals over a number of years, because of so many things that property is going to offer. Frisco is also the first city in the United States to adopt the green building standards for residential. And so we've got a list of information that we kind of put together in presentations when we know that's important to a company, to talk about how we do focus on sustainability, and not just our own financial, but also for the community and green standards. So we're not going after clean tech per se, but there are ways that we think that we can and should support ESG initiatives. Fair enough?
Yeah, great. Thank you.
All right, good. All right.
A question. When a company is looking at different areas in this, like in the specific area of like North Dallas, North Texas, what part do y'all play in when they're doing the research? They come to you and you do research, and of course present them with research, but when they're researching like this area versus Grapevine versus Capel versus whatever, and an outside marketing company is brought in, is that something that y'all work with, or is it something the company does?
So that's a great question. So if you think about site selection, you would think it's standardized across the entire United States. And it is, I think, for 49 states. The one state that does it different, y'all. Guess who that is? Texas. I worked for the governor in Louisiana, Governor Jindal.
Oh, okay.
And if a company came to Louisiana, I could have them a state offer, a site, a training package. I could put together a $5 or $10 million package in 2 weeks and get that out the door, right? In Texas, we're bottom up, local control, right? By the way, it is legislative season. Please go out and preach. We want anything that maintains local control for Frisco, anything that protects our revenues, that protects our ability to go in and generate new revenues, so minimize our caps. And we also don't like unfunded mandates. So there's just a little quick legislative sidebar, right?
Please.
But to your point, so what happens is most companies have a broker or a site selector. It may be a consultant, it may be a real estate broker from like an outside fee-based agency that's working on a commission. And they will do a desktop analysis to kind of look at all the cities, all the states, all the regions. And they oftentimes will start through the state and they'll send out an RFI. And then the state will send that down to all the different regional groups, sometimes the local groups, and then the DRC is technically our regional representative. I don't know if Fort Worth is the other one or not, if there's just DRC. And so they then distribute it out across the region, and then we get a chance to respond to that RFI. Our job in Frisco, based on directives from our board of directors and based on city council, is to get in front of that process and to work proactively directly with companies. And that's what Gloria's gonna talk a little bit about too, is how we are proactively building campaigns. And in fact, we're gonna be in New York in less than 2 weeks, and we've got, I think, 9 company meetings already set up. And that rarely happens at the local level, because usually that type of activity is sponsored at the regional level and the state level. But that just shows you how kind of innovative and proactive we are, so.
Do you want to define DRC, RFI, and RFP?
Yeah, so of course, Dallas, in our vernacular, right? So Dallas Regional Chamber, and they've got a really robust economic development program within the Chamber of Commerce. It's a small group, but a very dynamic group. Mike Rosa leads that. He's been there for a number of years. Gloria was his protege there, so we're very blessed to have her where she worked for the DRC. RFP, request for proposal. RFI, request for information. Sometimes companies will come directly to us, and we're seeing that more and more. Sometimes companies literally go into our website and submit an information request. We've had Fortune 500 companies at like the senior vice president level submit information on a generic form on our website and say, hey, I want information on Frisco. Blows my mind, right? And then of course, sometimes they've got an internal site selector or an external, and they will call us once they've got it down to 3 or 4 locations. We don't like that as much, because if they've already looked at sites, we can't help them find the site that might be the best location for them, even within Frisco, if they don't have the full scope of information that the brokers have. So we're not trying to eliminate the brokers or site selectors. We want to augment the work that they do and help them in that process. So, fair enough? All right, very good. All right, so let me try and wrap up my section here a little bit. All right, so the big question, is all this worth it? Anybody want to guess what this means for ROI? It's good. Guess what, I'm not there yet. Whoops, just kidding. So, that's okay. We moved some of our slides. We'll come back to this in just a second. Let's talk about our board. All righty. That's okay. We are accountable to you, the taxpayers, right? So I like to say oftentimes that I have 16 bosses. I report to the city manager's office, to the city manager, and to the assistant city manager. But I also report to a board of directors 7, appointed by the city council. And I'm in front of city council twice a month, updating them on the projects. When I go out and talk to a lot of other cities, it's not common for the economic development office, much less the leadership, to be in front of city council that frequently. So I just think that shows the level of communication so that we can get their feedback and we integrate that into all the projects and the marketing efforts and things like that we're doing. But we've got a phenomenal team. Jason Dudley's our chair. You've got, of course, Shannon Keaveney, Craig Moen, and Gary Carley, right, who served on the CDC. They also serve on an ad hoc committee for us that help us to do due diligence, to look at deals and make sure that we're protecting taxpayers' investment. Back to your question about how companies are faring. So this is a working board, right? Rick Fletcher, many of you have seen him working around the community quite a bit. Debbie Gillespie is appointed as the ISD representative. And then Craig Moen was our chair for a number of years. And Craig and Barbara Fasola are both leaving this year in September. They will be terming out, I guess, was it right? And so as they do, we'll probably have 2 more appointments here from city council soon. Now, down here, of course, we've got staff. That includes me and the rest of the staff. So if you think about that, there's some other functions related to the city's financial offices and controls. We have our incentives compliance. So if you put me here, this is what really makes things happen here, though, right? This is all the staff, and we really have 3 primary functions. Everything around the job creation, the recruitment, the attraction, the business retention, all the innovation efforts, the research, all of that rolls up under Gloria's responsibility. But quite frankly, Gloria is also our vice president. She's the deputy director. She's the number 2. And I really give her probably 80% of the day-to-day of this organization, and the sales and marketing functions are in Gloria's hands. So you've got some phenomenal leadership here working on your behalf. And then of course, we've got our marketing functions. We've got 1 position open here. A business retention position specialist is open because we just promoted Peyton up just a short while ago. And then of course, our internal administration services. So Veronica Trotman and Laura. Veronica's not here, Laura's not here, but they do a great job helping to keep the wheels on the wagon, so to speak. We've got a couple folks, let's see, I think, yeah, so here's some quick photos. Gloria, if you haven't met her before, she's a powerhouse. She worked at Downtown Development in Odessa. She worked for the City of Dallas on some of the biggest deals in their economic development office. She worked for the Dallas Regional Chamber. She's a former writer, editor for Dallas Morning News. She was at the Irving Chamber of Commerce, Irving Las Colinas Chamber, doing economic development. And her mentor, John Bonneau, who's no longer with us, is respected as one of the top economic developers in Texas. So we are just so fortunate to have your leadership here, Gloria. Thank you so much. Harry Whalen, he's Director of International. Harry's been here, I think, over 5 years, I think like 7 years, something like that. Harry's a veteran in economic development. He's been doing this for longer than I have, and he's really someone who's brought a lot of high-level leadership to Frisco. As we talk about making Frisco more of a global city, he's definitely at the forefront of bringing global companies and global leaders to Frisco. Stephanie Wagner, our most tenured person.
LF13.
What's that?
LF13 alone.
There you go. So Stephanie's been with us for 15 years. She's a certified planner. She really understands the real estate side of what we do really well. She helps us write a lot of our SOPs. But her principal function day to day is business retention and expansion director. So she leads all the efforts outreaching to our local companies, doing surveys and interviews, and helping make sure that we create the right environment for our existing companies to thrive. Jasmine Brennan, you've probably read about her in the news recently. She's been a pretty active speaker lately. She's our director of innovation. Her role is really down to 4 pillars. She does traditional economic development, 2 pillars of promotion and marketing, right? Going out and spreading the gospel of Frisco. 2, she does the site selection work, the project management to bring companies in. The 3rd component of her job is focused on innovation ecosystem building, so connecting the dots between entrepreneurs and investors and people who work in the startup ecosystem. And then finally, strategic planning and helping to tie our EDC efforts with those of the city's innovation efforts. So a lot of folks ask about her role because it's such a nebulous title, so I thought I would dive deeper a little bit on that. Erica Sriracha, our research specialist, she comes to us with a public policy background. She's a powerhouse as well. She's done some really great work helping advise us on our board policies in just less than a year that she's been here, and she helps us respond to all of our RFP and RFIs. Peyton Couch is going to talk to you a little bit later on today. He recently graduated with his master's in economic development. Super impressive young man. He's come here and he's running circles around me already. When we hired him, I had to start polishing my resume. Emily Pollard, what a powerhouse, y'all. Emily came here as our social media manager and special events coordinator. And when our director of marketing left, we asked Emily if she would step up as interim marketing manager. Y'all, she's crushing it. She is just doing this phenomenal job. So thank you so much for everything you're doing. She's going to share with y'all some really cool stuff that she's been working on here lately. And then Veronica and Laura. So when y'all see them, please thank them. Again, Veronica and Laura, they're oftentimes behind the scenes. They're not public so much. You don't see them. So please tell them thank you for all the things that they do to support all of us throughout the organization. So with that, I will pause to see if there's any questions or comments. Nope, I'm going to go back to this. So is it all worth it? Right? I would say maybe for every dollar that we invest at the Frisco EDC that we put into our projects and incentives and such, it returns $4.77 back to the taxpayers and due taxes, right? It also increases the tax base, the base that can be taxed additional, right, by $22. So every time you go and spend $1 somewhere, the EDC takes our portion, and then we return that back at fourfold. So thank you for continuing to spend your sales tax dollars in Frisco. That gives us the resources. Every time a cash register rings in Frisco, and it's a taxable sale for sales tax, that directly helps us to do this, which lowers the taxes, keeps the tax base predictable, diversifies the tax base, and keeps us long-term financially sustainable. So, before we move on, we don't really have a formal slot, but I want to make sure, Shannon, from the board's perspective, anything you maybe kind of want to share from this side of the table?
Oh, pressure's on.
So I had to put you on the spot there.
No, that's okay. Well, when I went through Leadership Frisco, this was my favorite day. And I remember thinking one day I would love to be part of EDC. So when the opportunity came, I was lucky enough to be selected. And so if this is something that speaks to you guys or something that you're interested in, I just recommend that you take the time to get involved in what it takes to be involved with EDC, which is one, going through Leadership Frisco and understanding how all the pieces go together, but also it's an appointed position, so you do have to be involved with city council and know city staff and be involved with things like that. And so it's not a, ooh, I'm interested in this, I'll get selected. It really is a long-term investment. Come to EDC meetings. Go to, Ren was on the CDC, go to the CDC meetings, which is the Community Development Corporation. It's the sister organization to the EDC. And, you know, we're not city council, we're not in front of everybody running through elections and doing all that, but we're really in the background, getting the things done that everybody wants to see to help the citizens with their city, to make it the place everybody wants to go. That's why I got involved. I want my kids to come back.
Yes.
I want them to come and want to live here and do all that when they grow up.
So to that point, the board's role is to set policy, to approve contracts, so all the incentive agreements, all the development agreements, the board has to approve all those. I have no authority to approve those. We can put the deal together, we can negotiate it, which, by the way, all that happens at the staff level, not the board level, but the board plays a huge role in helping us to evaluate the opportunities, the return on investment, and help us to shape some of the deal points as we sort of kind of bounce ideas off of them. Also, the board's role is really looking at kind of the long-term perspective, board governance, making sure that we've got the right mix of leaders kind of helping us. And sometimes that role also means that you're voluntold to do things. As she will tell you, that sometimes happens, so. Yeah, question back here?
Yeah, so when you look at your competition across the US, the 2 or 3 cities that you compete with the most, what does their investment look like versus Frisco's investment dollars?
When you say investment in terms of our budget or
Yes.
what we're spending?
Yeah, well, what Frisco spends to get that 4x return?
So that's a good question. I would say we've been very blessed with resources, and we are known nationally for putting together really great deals. I'll just say, we don't go out in public to talk about this a lot, but I'll be transparent with you because this is public information. We made an $18 million commitment to bring in TIAA, right? That was to match the state's Texas Enterprise Fund offer of $18 million. But they're bringing to that 2,000 high-paying jobs. This is one of the top 5 regional hubs for TIAA. They're also bringing 600 jobs that they're not getting paid for, that they're committing to on the books. But what they're not telling you is that new tower that they're building, that 525,000 square foot tower, that's gonna put hundreds of $millions in the tax rolls that they're gonna commit to. And that building is gonna accommodate 4,000 to 5,000 people. So when you think about that, they're publicly committing for half of what they're probably gonna do, which is not unusual, and we have a healthy ROI on that. We get paid back in less than 5 years on the deal, right? Now, not many cities can put a deal like that together, so we're trying to keep our powder dry, but we also don't try to just use the incentives. So one of the priorities that Ron Patterson had, my predecessor, and that, you know, I've kind of now taken the reign over, is we don't want to lead with incentives. We were known for having a huge catcher's mitt and a big bucket of incentives, right, when Ron and I got here. And it's the way that we had a reputation for doing deals. And quite frankly, what we needed to do is to sell Frisco for its strategic advantages. Companies should want to be here because the environment's right, because it's pro-business, because they can come here, find the right people, they can scale up and ramp quickly, and they'll be here healthy, long-term, sustainable, long after the incentives are gone. And so we started pivoting our marketing and leaning in more to innovation and talent and helping them understand the public-private partnerships. And as a result of that, look at our pipeline, look at the wins. People are responding, and we are now saying no more and more frequently. Our prospect pipeline used to be 25 to 30 companies. At one point, it peaked to 50 or 60. We have scaled it back because we're now so selective to find the right companies for Frisco. And even of a number of those, you're gonna find we're not providing incentives for all of those. So that's a long answer, but I think there's a lot of, hopefully, some good nuggets in it for you, Bob. Question?
This is a personal question for you.
Yep.
What leadership model, style do you subscribe to kind of attract such a powerhouse of team members?
Gosh, I don't know. I'd love the staff to answer that one. I guess, I try to set the vision and get out of the way. The reality is it's tough because I'm passionate about this. I've done it for a long time. Sometimes I get in the weeds, so I remind them, hey, help me get out of the weeds, right? But at the end of the day, we tried to build a team that would help us to take Frisco to the next level to do this proactive targeting. So that meant we had to go and find people that had skills to do the certain types of research, people that knew how to do the targeting, people that knew how to do the marketing. So the key is just really focus on your high-level strategy, your go-to-market strategy, stick to it, hold people accountable to that strategy so that all the big picture goals, the metrics, all roll down into individual staff that we all own individually, and we win as a team, we lose as a team, right? And we're all held accountable for that. And then, really just, giving people the direction and guidance they need to go and do their areas of work and try and be responsible for feedback and coaching. I have an expression, catch them doing something right. I believe in a lot of praise. Positive affirmation is so important to me. When our city manager or our mayor gives me a compliment, even if it's small, I tell them back, thank you for that affirmation. So I guess if it boiled down to one thing, for me, it's about positive affirmation. So. Gloria, anything on that?
Sure, I'd say, so as talent, I think Frisco, obviously, I think you'll hear a lot of the staff saying there's no better place to do economic development in the state of Texas or even across the nation. And so you want to be, and it's a big tagline, winners want to be around winners. And so you have a highly competitive team who loves to win, and they really are passionate about being public servants and the work that we do for the community. And then I think in terms of the culture here at the office, Jason has really created this environment of fail forward. And so everyone here, we lead in innovation and we're very innovative. He's created this environment where we have a strategic plan. Everybody has a KPI. You know what you're supposed to be doing. You can still color outside of the lines a little bit. And if that fails, you have a backup plan. You pick yourself up really quickly and you move forward. And so I think the team is allowed to, they're very empowered to innovate within the strategy. They're very empowered to take ownership and responsibility and accountability for those KPIs and goals. And then they know, oh, if I don't, I'm gonna try something different, but I better have some backup plan, right? In case that fails, I can go to him and say, okay, I tried this, it didn't work out, but I'm gonna pivot really quickly and I have a backup plan. And here are the lessons that I learned from that and why it didn't work. So, next time, I know not to go down that path, but I learned something from it. So that fell forward and that learning is really important here. We're leaning in, I'll talk a little bit about, the new strategy from the board's directive to be very proactive. No other city, EDC is really doing that work. To Jason's point, you do it at the regional and the state level. And so the team here is learning new strategy, new go-to-market, and that takes a lot of courage and innovation, but a lot of safety net. So I think there's an environment here, that culture of unrivaled performance to be, lean in really heavy, but then to also, if it doesn't work out, you take ownership of that failure too, but you move on pretty quickly. And I think just that empowerment of the role really gives everybody a lot of ownership, and I think that's what I've found from his leadership, and what makes it so great to work here, right, is you can innovate within your role too.
Thank you.
Gloria is a master of implementation. She's just done a phenomenal job of saying, hey, here's the goals, here's the metrics, right? And just constantly putting that in front of all the staff so we're all reminded about what we're all working towards, and doing cross-pollination, cross-collaboration. She's huge on giving people opportunities to kind of work in special groups and teams on different projects and initiatives.
Yes, are there any one or two cities identified that we lose projects to? Some that seems like we lose some of the major or more attractive projects and those one or two cities are always in the running with us?
Sure, I'm gonna talk about that in an unusual way. First of all, I came from Frisco, excuse me, I came from Houston, right? I was there for 5 years. Before there, I was in Louisiana. Before there, I was in Austin. And what I have found so often in my career, it's interesting, Louisiana was worried about losing deals to Houston. Houston didn't care about Louisiana, right? In Houston, they cared because they were losing deals to Frisco. They were losing deals to Dallas. By the way, I was not a popular person when I left Houston to come to Frisco, right? But the reality is we don't look at them as competition. We do compete with Dallas. We do compete with Plano and McKinney and sometimes Allen, Irving, Las Colinas, kind of the headquarters markets here internally, I think sometimes our toughest competition. Because a lot of times when they're doing a national search, look at what's happening in Dallas-Fort Worth. People are starting to figure out central part of the U.S., great costs compared to the coast. You've got this great talent base. It's a fast-growing market. Lots of economic diversity, cultural, ethnic diversity. Those are great ingredients. So a lot of times they're narrowing it down quickly to Texas and to North Texas. I would say nationally, we still compete with Nashville, probably a Scottsdale or a Phoenix, Atlanta. What are some of the other big markets you would say that sometimes are?
Cary, North Carolina?
So
Sometimes Raleigh, yeah.
Yeah, so nationally, when you look at, and I'll run through some of this, but if a company is looking at low cost and talent, where's talent moving to in the region? And so it's typically, somebody asked about incentives and how we compare. So the TIAA deal, we were competing with Jacksonville, Florida, where they already have a major corporate campus, as well as Denver, where they have a workforce there. The issue in Denver is they couldn't scale quick enough. The talent pipeline, the future pipeline wasn't ready to go for them. They're adding, they can get up to 3,500 in that building, but it's 2,600 jobs over a number of years, and they weren't going to be able to find that talent in Denver. Jacksonville did put a much bigger incentive on the table than we offered. So to Jason's point, it's not always about the incentive. So Florida, you look at states with no state income tax is the first decision a CEO is gonna look at when he's coming out of a coastal city that has high state income taxes. So that's gonna be your Florida, your Arizona, your Nevada, Texas. It's gonna be some of those middle markets. So we compete very heavily with Miami, Florida, right? There's been a lot of financial corporations. They typically leave New York and look at Miami or Atlanta. It's been really hard to get into New York and try to get them over those two communities into Texas. And then on the California coast, when they're looking at coming over, we have to leapfrog Phoenix, Arizona, which has a big tech hub there, and then Las Vegas has been doing a lot, and they have an incentive pool. So those are typically, for the coastal cities, the communities that we have to leapfrog that are gonna have competitive advantages in terms of cost and business regulations, and also big clusters of technology centers and corporate environments. We hear about Austin as well. Nashville also is sometimes in the mix. Nashville has started to fall off in recent years because of the future talent pipeline. So they have a lot of work to do. They did really great work in the marketing around the culture and the environment and Music City, kind of like Austin did. But then as a company dives deeper and says, making a 15-year decision, and I need the talent also here like in 10 years and 15 years and 20 years, they start to find that pipeline isn't as robust as a market like DFW or Miami or Atlanta, where that talent is going to continue to flock to.
So I'm going to put an exclamation point on what she just said. If you think about it, the size of those cities, y'all, we are punching above our weight. We are competing with some really competitive big cities here, right? And very, very established cities. So
yeah, and then in the regional local market, there are 5 corporate headquarters within DFW. So they look at Dallas, Fort Worth, Irving, Las Colinas, Plano, and Frisco. So anytime the state or the Dallas Regional Chamber gets one of those requests for proposals, and it's a headquarters operation, a big tech office, it's gonna go out to those 5 big communities, because that's where they want to cluster. They also, winners want to be around winners. TIAA wants to be around other finance institutions, other technology bases, because they're looking also to kind of pull some of that talent as well. That's a strategy for them.
can I add one more thing real quick before I forget?
I was just gonna say too, the infrastructure is something we can lose too sometimes.
Yeah.
If we have five big companies that are all looking at us, and we accept one of them, all of a sudden, they've occupied half of a building at the Star, and this other company now has lost out, they're gonna have to wait 18 more months for the next building to come along. And so if they're moving quickly, and we have several people, we almost have to cherry pick sometimes who we're gonna push for, and then they're left with their second pick.
Yeah.
Because they can't get here as fast as they want to.
So I want to talk about a few projects real quick to wrap up and put a point on what she just said. Coincidentally, sometimes we are working with competitors at the exact same time, right? So we can't talk about who we're working with when we're talking to other companies. So we brought this year Boingo Wireless and Extenet, who are two huge leaders in the 5G wireless mobility space. I just literally dinner a week ago with the Chief Technology Officer of Verizon, and earlier that day, we were with one of the top leaders with T-Mobile, and they're both talking about the Boingos and the Extenets of the world. Well, which one announced first? Was it Boingo? Or Extenet?
And Boingo was going through the state Texas Enterprise
Yeah.
Fund, so we were awarded 2 state incentive packages. TIAA was the large one, and then Boingo received one as well. They came in at the same time, to your point, but because Boingo was going through the state process, it took them a little bit longer.
Yeah, and so it spooked them. They almost didn't want to go forward. And finally they realized, well, we're not in the same building, we're close. It's going to create a cluster of talent, which is already here, but it's going to help grow it even further. So ultimately, they both moved to Frisco, and they're both working with these major companies. But I want to mention one other thing, which I think is something that, talk about unsung heroes in the process. Who in here would think that the police department has anything to do with recruiting companies? Right?
Yeah.
Safety.
Yeah.
Safety. We saw a huge shift in our prospect pipeline and how many companies were talking about safety after you saw what happened over the last several years, especially with homelessness and after so much of the civil unrest and things like that. I mean, it breaks our heart what's happening across the country. But companies were like, our employees aren't safe going into work anymore in this location. So they started looking for safe locations as they were trying to expand or relocate. And through that process, we were working with TIAA, and they asked those questions. Well, they sent us a list of, I think, 5 or 8 questions, and it literally took us a 70-page PowerPoint to answer those questions from all the different topics they had. They were big, deep questions, right? But really, talking about Chief Stevens, the work that the PD did, talking about reaching out to the diverse communities, the communities of color, how we build those relationships. I think we were able to use an example where we talked about the march. That was powerful to tell them that, we had our mayor and our police chief leading a 4,000 person march, and then you had our EOC watching all the traffic signals, shutting down the lights to help enable and help that to happen, right? Cities don't do that across the country the way we do. And that told TIAA, who was really focused on diversity, inclusivity, and DEI, equity, thank you. It really told us that that was important. They told us that was really important to them because their new CEO is a woman of color, right? And so that was something that, as they were making that final decision, that was a key tipping point. And I just want to thank Darren Stevens and his team for pulling together a lot of that information. But really, it's about the work that they've done throughout the years that they were able to tell that story.
If I could say something about that, and I appreciate that opportunity. It used to be that companies want to know what is the safety profile of a community, what are the crime rates, and what kind of activity are you seeing, what are the arrest rates, those types of things. But to Jason's point, now it has turned more into a conversation, and not just what is crime like, but what is the relationship with the police department, and how is the police department engaged with that diverse community. And I think we've done a good job in advance of any of this, not because of economic development, because it's just the right darn thing to do for the community of how we treat people. And I want to make a point on something else if I could, and if I'm going down a direction that's incorrect or different, please stop me, because this is my perception of it. But it goes back, I've heard 2 questions in here today regarding what about the businesses that we lost? What about the ones that went someplace else? And I'll tell y'all a story that's over 10 years old. There's a large furniture manufacturer delivery place down the road. And I don't know how many of y'all know that was looking at Frisco before it went down the street. And I say that because the leadership from that company, the president, the owner, came and actually sat down and had a long conversation with us. They wanted to know, can you handle the traffic, the different volumes, things like that. And we were told, hey, this is a big deal. because this is a company that only builds another regional location about every 10 to 15 years. But I think we were also told that it would probably increase our tax revenue by about 50% of what it currently was. So go back 15 years ago, look at what Frisco was, and man, that's enticing. That is super enticing. But as they got into knowing the numbers of the deal, and Jason helped me out, it was not a good business deal for Frisco. It was not a good business deal for Frisco. So even though we were looking at something that looked really attractive, we had to let it go. So let me ask you this. On that piece of property where that was looking at going, do you know what sits there now? The Star. And what I heard, and part of the Fields project, and what I heard Jason say earlier is that was an impetus for TIAA, Dr. Pepper Keurig, and many others to see, okay, this is how that corporate profile of Frisco is gonna look, and we wanna be part of that. So, it's, I don't know about y'all, but we all probably have a boyfriend or girlfriend in high school that got away that we thought, my life was gonna end, but it worked out better. And so, sometimes the things we don't get, sometimes the things that get away because it's best that they get away because there's something better around the corner. So
Amen,
anyway,
brother.
I'm gonna sit back down, thank you.
So that's all the time I have. Going over, but y'all had great questions. I hope our replies were helpful. So with that, I'm gonna hand the mic over to Gloria. So thank you.
That's so hard to follow. That is economic development at its finest. When we say we love to win and we want to win, the team is extremely competitive and we fight so hard for Frisco. Nobody fights harder in this boardroom at pitching than the staff you have here. We throw everything on the table about safety and what it's like to be here. We tell our personal stories about living in the community and how great it is. We sell at the highest level. But to his point, when we lose, it does hurt, when they walk away, but we get back in the game, right? It doesn't slow us down. We don't stop. We keep going for the next one. And then in hindsight, when you look back, some of those deals, right, weren't the best fit. And when you look at what we've created today at the Star, it's been phenomenal. So I'm Gloria Salinas. I'm Vice President here at the Frisco EDC. I lead business attraction, retention expansion, innovation, research. I've been working extremely close with marketing the last few months as we've started to launch this new attraction campaign and really get out to those coastal markets and start telling the Frisco story through some really cool advertising. Emily's going to talk a little bit about that. Today I want to cover with you, kind of take you all the way back to the beginning when our board enacted they commissioned a strategic plan to talk a little bit about how we could do economic development different here in Frisco, how we could be much more aggressive, proactive, get in front of the companies long before the site selectors do, and do some targeting and research and some marketing to them. I'm going to actually show you some of our pitch deck and give you a behind the scenes look and ask you to become a CEO and really consider looking at Frisco. And then at the end, I'm going to kind of run through the referrals, the leads, how we work with community partners, and how we actually build this community environment of economic development. You don't maybe think of yourself as economic developers, but we work with UNT, we work with Workforce Commission, we work with a lot of organizations that help us in doing economic development. So when we look at, as we start from the beginning, the board of directors really kind of sat back and looked after that Toyota loss and said, how can we do economic development differently? They commissioned a strategic plan and took a look at the current ecosystem in Frisco. You always start with your talent and workforce because you're going to be able to sell the company on that first. We know all of the competitive advantages around cost, but the company is also making a talent decision for the long haul. So when they looked at Frisco, and even this is a really good snapshot of what the region looks like as well. Headquarters, corporate offices in the Fortune 500 and 1000. We have a really nice cluster of tech and innovation. We do a lot of cool things in smart cities with Dr. Jason Cooley over at the city. Our business of sports is phenomenal. This is really one that sets us apart when we talk about competitiveness in the region. Nobody does business of sports like Frisco, right? When you look at PGA and the Cowboys and FC Dallas. We just have this long list of phenomenal sports teams. The corporate offices and the business governing bodies of sports have created another cluster for us, and that's gaming and media, right? So you look at all the esports, the wearables technology, the sports healthcare and technology. So there's just a vibrant list that goes on of the different types of companies. And as our team starts to dive deep and figure out who are the companies, the strategy is who are the companies in the high cost markets in the coastal cities, because we've seen an influx from California coming into DFW. We've seen an influx from, starting to see that from New York with TIAA and Goldman Sachs looking at Dallas and building there. And so we take a look at this list and we start to go into those coastal cities and figure out who matches this profile and who matches our workforce profile here. Who is coming up on their lease pretty soon? Do they have maybe 5 years left of the lease? Have they recently changed the CEO, the CFO, because maybe they're operating in the red a little bit? Do they have talent issues? Have they had, the team even goes on LinkedIn and takes a look at how long have their job postings been open in that market? Have they had a really hard time finding finance professionals? Has that job posting been open for more than 90 days? Have they had a really hard time finding software engineers and developers? Because we have 2 times the national tech average here. And so we start to meet them where they are, and we go in with a pitch to say, we understand that, there's some challenges happening today in the market. Remote work is also a big issue for them in the coastal cities as well, getting their teams back in the office. And so we start that pitch of being a business solution. Frisco is now pitching as we can help solve some of those problems for you in the long run. And so to kind of recap our 22, we want to start by showing you what that actually looks like. 2022 for us was a banner year. We carry about 15 projects month to month. We basically did a month's worth of closing all projects within the year. So we just want to take a moment to show you a recap of that and what it looks like. So a phenomenal year. That, looking at our numbers, really, this is our favorite slide. We call this our trophy slide. As economic developers, we love to see this. In 2022, all of these companies not only chose Frisco to move here to relocate, but even existing companies continued to choose Frisco and expand. So Peyton is going to cover business retention and expansion. But Haskell, Bowler, and Garver were all existing construction engineering firms here in Frisco. Are you you're with Garver?
Yeah.
Great. So they continued to expand and grew exponentially, and we did some business expansion retention work with them. McAfee came out of Plano. This is their regional headquarters office. They're headquartered in San Jose. Looking at the new regional headquarters with the potential of doing what we call a Texas two-step. So oftentimes you'll find that they pick a new location and then eventually they'll bring the flag over with them very quietly. So we have very high hopes that one day this will be their big headquarters operations. Acolyte Digital was also here in the community. They have investors and VCs out of New York that gave them another round of funding, and with that injection of capital asked them to take on some growth, and they chose Frisco for their new home to grow. Toshiba, along with, we don't have it on here, but Comerica Bank opened innovation hubs here, so we are now home to 5 Fortune 500 corporate innovation and R&D hubs. That's Comerica Bank at the Star. Toshiba here in Hall Park. We have T-Mobile, Magellan Health, as well as Keurig Dr. Pepper. So even the diversification of those corporate R&D and innovation hubs is pretty phenomenal. Inside Toshiba, the coolest thing that they're doing there is they are actually incubating startups. And they said they chose Frisco because we have a high concentration of startups. About 282 startups call Frisco home today. 77 of those are in sports technology and sports innovation, so that's that business to sports as well too. But these corporate R&D and innovation hubs say, we know that 90% of startups will fail, and when they fail, we have the opportunity to pick up that talent, bring them in, nurture them, either bring them into the corporate innovation environment or have them continue to kind of innovate within the startup and incubation space. So they're incubating those startups, and then the other cool thing they have there is their mergers and acquisitions team. Somebody asked about M&A. Their merger and acquisition team is in-house with those startups. So say some really cool startup team has created an awesome device in the retail point of sale system or a fintech technology, that M&A team will merge and acquire that startup right on site. So that's a really cool, exciting thing that's happening there. Jason mentioned Extenet and Boingo Wireless. Boingo came out of LA, headquartered on Avenue of the Stars, and chose the new building here. So the 3 out-of-state relocations were Boingo from LA, Ruiz Foods from California, and Extenet from Chicago. So going back to policing, that discussion about #1 safest city in America, that accolade really resonated with those that were coming out of LA and Chicago, where crime has been pretty devastating, and particularly after COVID. And then the rest, obviously TIAA is our big one, right? We talk about that one. Having that new regional headquarters here is pretty phenomenal. Harry Whalen and International worked that deal. The other cool thing about this is these deals were happening before the pandemic. They were then put on pause. And then last year they just revived themselves and we were able to close them all in 1 year. So that was pretty phenomenal. We competed at the regional level for all of these. So you know TIAA's current campus is in Louisville. They were looking at Plano, the vacant lot that they have at Legacy West. Boingo was also considering Plano and Dallas, and so we were able to win that one as well. Ruiz Foods also looked they looked at 11 cities across the region. They took an entire tour of the region one day. They were pretty exhausted by the time they got to Frisco. Jason hopped in an elevator with the CEO. He hit the first floor button. 4 floors, we're on 4th floor. He hit floor 1 and said, "Why Frisco?" And Jason literally gave him an elevator pitch, and we were able to land them here. So that one was a really cool story too. So just kind of walking you through what it actually looks like at the end of a year.
Laura, before you go on, I just want to emphasize something. Can you go back?
Yeah.
Community Coffee is another one where they call us from Hall Park and say, we've got the CEO of Community Coffee, his head of real estate, his head of HR, and the rest of the team. Can you come give us 5 minutes, right? So I'm working on that for 5 minutes. Literally, with the exception of TIAA, I have very little interaction with these companies. It's Gloria and the project management team, the sales team, we're on the front lines working with these companies, doing the deals, working through all the bottlenecks and all the speed bumps, and they're just doing a phenomenal job. So just again,
Thank you.
applaud to you and the rest of the team for all the work that y'all are doing. So thank you.
It's fun. It's a lot of fun here in Frisco. So as an economic developer, one thing we really, really love is our numbers. This is going to be a thick numbers slide for you, but we'll walk you through. So we're looking at October 2021. This is actually the day I started here in Frisco. I started October 11th, 2021, looking at all the way through December 31st, 24. So we won 16 projects. Those are all those corporate relocations and expansions that happened here. 19 projects total when we include the real estate, so Southstone Yards and some other large real estate projects announced as well. Those are tied here. We added, with those real estate projects, we added 1 million new square feet of mixed use development in the past year. 50% of the projects that we won were innovation related, so McAfee, Extenet, Boingo, so we're seeing a growth in innovation. 5 of them were headquarters operations. They created 5,648 new jobs to Frisco that did not exist here before. And they pretty much absorbed nearly 1 million square feet of office. And then when we look at, Jason talked about the ROI, all of this added to the city's tax roll, 333 million new commercial property tax revenue and business personal property tax, because they're gonna buy furniture, fixtures, equipment, and design office, and we're gonna tax that and get some of that back as well, in addition to the commercial real estate lease. So when we look at the numbers game of economic development, we always look at that ROI, and that's why we're tracking, we're making sure we understand what they're adding. Before we give them an incentive, we have to see those job numbers, they have to get them here on the ground. Once they add them, then we provide that incentive to them. The other cool thing is 9 of those 16 did not receive incentives. So to Jason's point, we do not give an incentive to every deal. We're now at a point where we're winning without incentives, just because of the story. 4 of those, as we mentioned, were the business retention and expansion. They were already existing. They chose to stay here, so we didn't lose them, and then they chose to grow in addition to that. The business retention expansion, we talked about Garver, Bowler, those folks, we saved 827 jobs with them, and then they added an additional 320 jobs with their growth. So that local growth, which Peyton is going to talk about, is really, really important to us as well. Any questions on these numbers?
How do we compare with other cities like Irving, Richardson, Dallas, Plano, and where do we stand as Frisco?
So we actually beat every community this past year. The other largest real estate deal that was done in Dallas was Goldman Sachs, and that was about the size of TIAA. TIAA accounted for half of this, 2,600 new jobs, right, nearly half, and the rest of it were all the other deals. So Dallas did one big jumbo project, and we had all of the other smaller ones too that kind of lifted us up past that. We compete very strongly. As Jason mentioned, we punch way above our weight class when it comes to corporate relocations, and particularly as a suburb, we're considered a suburban market, compared to obviously Dallas is a much bigger city. So we compete very, very well.
Question, being from Garver, I knew, a couple years ago that we were like running out of space in our current office, and I had heard talk about it possibly moving to a different city as we were gonna expand. What is but I didn't know that they had worked with you guys. How was that process like? Did Garver come to you and say help, like, or how does that work?
Sometimes it is the company coming, and we hope that if you're within a company and you hear some of those things, you mention to your C-suite, hey, go talk to Frisco before you actually look at leaving. This is part of that gospel. And then the other most important way, what we hope would have happened is that business retention expansion team, which is Stephanie Wagner, formerly Peyton, they actually go out and meet with companies. So last year she did 157 site visits within the community. So those are our major employers, top employers. They also look at when the lease is coming up. They're also looking at industry trends, and we found that construction engineering was a rapidly growing industry coming out of COVID. And even through COVID, right, construction never stopped. And so they keep a pulse on just some of those industry trends. They're looking at leases, they're out knocking on doors and meeting with the company. And the initiative is to be able to catch that growth need, or that expansion need, or if they're struggling, saying, we're trying to grow, but we can't find the talent, they come in with some programming through UNT, Frisco ISD, Collin College, and try to create programming that can help them find the right talent. So the BRE team is either meeting with you, or the company at times will come to us direct. Good questions. Any others? Yes.
I noticed that gaming and retail was one of your target clusters,
Yes.
but it wasn't under tech and innovation.
Yes.
So why esports and gaming and video game development, and who do you all target in those spaces to bring to the city?
So we are now home to headquarters of 5 of the 7 esports teams. I don't know if y'all knew that. And that is something that grew because of, Jerry Jones and the Cowboys have invested in esports. Mark Cuban here as well, Dallas Mavericks have an esports team. A lot of the business of sports is investing in that. So we're looking at any esports technology, the gaming, so Complexity Gaming is down here as well too. Within that cluster, let me see, I'll go back to it as well too, because it's probably easier. So any in-gaming experiences, management platforms, new media, digital media, suppliers and vendors to any of that gaming ecosystem, and then any video game development, those are all components that we look at when we're targeting companies. So the team will go in, and we actually have a variety of resources. There are actually economic development platforms like Gazelle, and there's a variety of research tools like PitchBook, and we'll go in and look at companies within this we can filter gaming and media that have received a new injection of capital or are having a growth spurt, kind of, I mean, we're doing it with VRE too, right? It kind of is one and the same. And then we're kind of doing some outreach and deciding, do you need a new home? Would you like to be around this cluster? Because there's already a really vibrant cluster here that's kind of under the surface.
What about studios such as like EA Sports or 2K Studios?
Yes.
Do you, even if they're not looking for a new home, do you look to get them involved in the community?
Yes. Yes. Even with PGA, Lauren's here, we've had extensive conversations. When we look at this segment 2, new media, digital media, we look at things like ESPN, NBC Sports, any of that kind of falls into business and sports and gaming. But this has just been really an organic vertical that's taken off because of the vibrant business and sports division that's here. So.
You've got a connection with the EA, you would love it.
Yes, yes, if you.
Well, I manage that on behalf of the PGA, so that's why I'm asking.
Yes.
What you guys are spending, so.
Yeah, so we've actually met, we had a sports innovation roundtable just a couple of weeks that Jason and Jasmine led, and we brought all of the sports leaders, C-suite, together and talked about, believe it or not, like the sports industry is really struggling and trying to figure out how to become more digital. And there's a lot of streaming happening now, you know, how to offer games and interaction with the customer and the viewer. And so this is one platform that they really want to talk about piloting, gaming and, you know, ways that they can show, you know, FC Dallas games online and stream to the device directly. And so these are all things that our Director of Innovation, in partnership with Dr. Jason Cooley, who's the Chief Innovation Officer over at the city, are working. He does a phenomenal job of piloting new technologies, right? The Google Wing and drone, we've seen those announcements. And so we tried to bring him in-house too to work with us to try to figure out how we can pilot new technologies that the business and sports might be interested in.
You'll see something in a week, Augusta National and Masters are doing something with EA. Our Pines, without getting too into this and distracting. If there were interest in bringing something from any company in the gaming space, is that something you guys would want to work with the company on or help them, like support them in some way?
Absolutely, we'd be happy to. So what we can do in this area is provide, you know, tours, like maybe go out and see Complexity Gaming, put together a roundtable of all these sports executives, let them meet with them. You know, we basically are convening business leaders with like-minded business leaders and trying to build a synergy. So if they think their technology might work with something that the PGA is doing or something that the Cowboys are doing or something that FC Dallas is doing, it's our job, the Director of Innovation here, right, Jasmine, to kind of convene and connect that synergy and help them try to find a home here. Yeah. So we're happy to, as Jason mentioned, if you have a connection, we're happy to work with you and how we can kind of collaborate and bring those folks
And
together.
we'll sign an NDA all day long.
Yeah, all day. All day.
Love it.
I'm curious on, any incentives we do offer, how do we keep these companies accountable if we were like maybe run into recession and jobs become an issue? You're hearing all these job layoffs with Microsoft and Amazon and Google. How does that affect us and some of the incentives we guys do if that was to happen here? Right? We've been more recession proof than other areas,
Yes.
but how do we relate?
That is such a great question. We actually did have to pivot and adjust a little bit during the pandemic because of remote work and hybrid work. So the incentives are written so that the jobs created are on site. And we need them to be on site because the lease is where we're gonna get the commercial property tax revenue from. That's ROI to us, right? So we're really selling that they have office space and those jobs are here on site. We're not gonna incentivize you for remote workers in Chicago or remote workers in New York. These are jobs here in Frisco and job opportunities for Frisco residents. So during the pandemic, we did see, you know, folks like Keurig, Dr. Pepper, a lot right here in Hall Park went remote. So Jason mentioned our researcher, Erica Sriracho, went and looked at best practices for how do you do amendments or extensions. She did a lot of policy research on what Austin was doing, what, you know, New York was doing, what New Jersey was doing, what LA was doing. How were they, you know, working with the companies that were currently in compliance? They were coming up for a payment, but those jobs were not here. What do we do? So we put together that policy package, and maybe if you want to talk a little bit more about it, but the board ultimately decided to do amendments, extensions to kind of get them through COVID. And then as we've started to come back, they're starting to roll those back a little bit now as in office is happening, but that might be,
Yeah,
you want to ask that?
there's the option for flexibility. One of the great things that you see across incentives through EDC and everything that Frisco does and all of that, they're all performance-based. So it's not, oh, TIAA, you wanna come to Frisco, great, here's $1 million. Come to Frisco. It's, no, here's a 5-10 year plan of how you're gonna do stuff and what you have to meet in order to get incentives for the different things that you do. So a lot of it is performance-based, a lot of it is job-based, but there's also, if you're building a building, there's incentives that can be associated with money that you're spending on infrastructure. With the EDC stuff too, it's, a lot of it is outside of just money, and those relationships that everybody has really helps, because the EDC does have its hands tied really tight on what we are allowed to do and who we are allowed to do it with. And so, there are rules on headquarters and certain things that companies have to have in order for that money to ever be able to be something that they can have. So a lot of companies come to us that don't qualify for the legal requirements of an incentive, and just us being able to, as Gloria was talking about, bring people together that matter, that can get them things they need that aren't just financially based.
But that, as you know, economic developers policy is what guides us, mayor, council, as well as the board. We will research all day and provide, staff recommendations or give a list of what other communities are doing. And it's up to the board of directors and the city council to set the policy on how flexible they want to be. And then once they give us guidance, we go back and work with the company and say it's our board's directive or, mayor and council's directive that, we can provide an extension, but within 6 months, you have to start rolling those employees back in. Contracts also can be void, right? If they do not meet compliance and they're not performing at that level, they're not gonna bring employees back in, they've decided to go fully remote, people are living in Costa Rica and elsewhere, and they're just not gonna do it, then we also, the contract at that point then just dissolves. All right, so now we're getting into our pitch. So this is where I ask you to now become a C-suite executive. You're based in a really high cost. You're in New York, you're in LA, you're Boingo, you're TIAA. You have not been able to get your workers back into the office. You are shedding a lot in
I've seen that before. How long do you have? You're done.
20 seconds.
Just drag it out.
All right,
No,
15
no.
minutes. Okay, imagination activation really quickly. Okay, so
Take a
you're,
5-minute break
you're
after this,
you're
right?
based in one of these high-cost markets. You're struggling to find talent. You're shedding a lot in your real estate costs. Nobody's coming back into the office. You need a new game plan, one for your company to survive, and one for you to continue to scale it because your shareholders still need you to be an effective company and make money. So now you're gonna start really considering, where do I wanna be, because I've gotta get out of here, and I've gotta find some new places to look. The first thing you're gonna do, what we find is they look at access, right? So if you're a global company and you've been on the coast, you probably have teams internationally as well. So you need international flights, and you also need access to domestic areas as well to get to your customers and your clients that may still be in those markets as well. So we sell our airports, and we sell the international and local access. Those are really, really big highlights for us. As you know, business travel in a globally connected city, you need an international airport, and you also need that domestic airport. So this is one of the first things that they kind of check off their list is international access to airports, and we win there. So this is not working now. Is it because of that? There we go. The second thing you're gonna look at is cost, right? So you are gonna look at a low business cost, high speed to market. You have to relocate, and you have to do it pretty quickly. There can't be a disruption to your business. You've gotta move thousands of people across the country pretty fast, seamlessly, without much interruption. So that permitting process, the construction, and all of that timeline is gonna be really critical for you. You're then gonna look at your square footage. So this is your average price of Class A office space in Frisco. When they are in New York and what we're competing with, they start for Class A in New York, San Francisco, LA at $85 a square foot. That's on the low end. Typically they're paying $90, $95 a square foot. So this is where we really get them. When they come out here and they tour the Star and they take a look at all of the amenities and they see this price here, that's cutting, they just save themselves about half on real estate cost. And then we mentioned no state personal income tax. So Texas, Florida, Nevada, Arizona are all really gonna get looks. The next thing they look at is talent pipeline. They know typically about 30% of employees in the relocation are not gonna move with them. So they're gonna have to backfill and hire at least 30% of what they have today that aren't gonna move. And then they need a future talent pipeline. So at the regional level, today we know workers, because of COVID, are not gonna commute further than 30 minutes for a job. Within 30 minutes of Frisco, there are 2.2 million workers. That's a nice pull for them. We have 2 times the national average of tech workers here in Frisco, and that is also very appealing. So they have the tech, every company now is a tech company. They need some facet of technology. They're also gonna look at education. 67% of Frisco residents have a bachelor's degree or higher. That is a huge, huge sell for them. That is a ready-made, educated pipeline that's ready to go. And then we have future pipelines. So, okay, yes, I land, I'm able to backfill that 30% that didn't come with me. But now, because I was shedding so much and I was losing, with a lot of the cost systems, I need to scale and grow. Do you have the future talent pipeline? I'm also signing the lease for 10 or 15 years, so I need to be able to grow within the next 10 or 15 years. And so they're gonna look at future talent pipeline. The fact that we have 20 plus universities and colleges in the district and around, DFW tells them, okay, well, there is education, there's a pipeline churning for me, and there's gonna be new employees in the market. Then they look at the actual ecosystem. So when we talk about what makes Frisco different from a Plano, from Dallas, from Fort Worth, the other communities that they're looking at, public-private partnerships is a huge one. So nobody does public-private partnerships the way Frisco does, and this is phenomenal. This tells them that we're invested in the business community. The city partners with businesses. We operate at the speed of business, and we're a partner with them. The permitting process is also huge. No.
I think we'll take a break.
Want to do a break? Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Then we can do it.
So 9-month permitting process, can I just tell you today in California, 2 years for entitlements. 2 years before you can even get an entitlement to even begin construction, and then going through your construction permits and your plumbing permits and your electrical permits, it's just a nightmare. When we say 9 months, they look at us like, no, you mean like to get the application like in the door, or what are you talking about? This is just a phenomenal number for us. Diverse industries make us recession proof. So we are highly diverse in terms of, when you saw that win, right? We have technology companies, we have finance companies, we have logistics companies, we have companies that run the gamut. So if there is a tech bust, those tech workers are able to find work in other industries and they're able to absorb that talent. So they want to cluster in a diverse industry market, because if some industry falls, your workforce is still going to be able to find a place to go. We had a 100% economic rebound after COVID. That is huge. Most communities did not recover, as we know, 100%, even 50%. And so, yes.
Just a quick question. The 2.2 million potential workforce within 30 minutes of Frisco, how did you derive that data?
So we use Jobs EQ, and we also use a lot of labor analytics, and we're currently doing a workforce study with Urban Logic, and they actually look at the workers here and where they're going, and then they look at within 30 minutes how many workers come into Frisco. The interesting thing also as well, when we talk about existing talent, in 2019, just before COVID, we were losing 86% of our workforce to jobs outside the region. And that's just because our job growth wasn't keeping up with the population boom. It also informed the types of companies we need to hire or bring here for a talent to really work within the community. So we lose talent to Toyota in Plano, Salesforce in Dallas, Comerica. That's one of the reasons Comerica put the innovation hub up here, is because they wanted to keep that talent up here in the north. And so the existing talent that we have is.
So quick follow-up to that. The data behind that metric, is that public information, or is that just proprietary that you're using for marketing purposes?
It can be public, so if you're interested in seeing it, we can provide it.
I'm
Yes.
very
Yes,
interested in
yes.
seeing it, yes.
So it actually, it is actually really scary to know how granular we can get on residents and where they're going, where they're spending their sales tax revenue, where they go to work. Everything that you do is tracked through cell phone and portable devices and cell phone.
Yeah, because we deal with this metric all the time.
Yes.
And that is significantly different than the data that we've derived in Plano.
Okay.
So I'd
Sure,
love to see it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it may be because Plano maybe captures more of their own internal, so they're not drawing so much from outside. We lose a lot of our internal and we draw more from outside as well too. The 30-minute kind of shed is, the furthest it goes is kind of Irving, is where that 30-minute kind of wraps. And so it's about Irving into everything around.
That makes
Yes.
sense. Yeah. Well, yeah, clearly.
The other, yes.
So I've seen a lot about like big business, and I think the slide says it's best for business in Frisco. But what about like small businesses and minority-owned businesses? Like, how do you tell success in small business as opposed to like PBAs and TAs?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We do talk about a lot of the mid-sized companies and then the fast-growing companies and the startups as well too. So that's not a slide in here, but we have slides and data on startup and technology, and we dive much deeper when they're a technology company like Boingo or McAfee. We dive much deeper into the smaller startups as well as just small businesses around the community too, because they're looking for those types of partnerships.
Does it generally tell the same success story of?
Yeah, so we also talk about programs like YAY, and get much more granular into community partnerships also, yeah. Public education has been always this crown jewel in Frisco's hat, and obviously if you're, coming from these coastal cities, you know that education, public education is not great. It's also a competitive factor for us within the regional market. So when they look at Dallas, we've won a lot of deals that maybe Dallas didn't pick up just because of our public education and the offerings that we have there.
It's brilliant that you have Debbie, as the rep, board member working with you guys.
Yes.
Because that's an important connection
Yes.
point.
So all these data points and stats, obviously, also I think the diversification in the school district is really important, that it's a very diverse. So if you're coming out of coastal cities, you're used to a global city and a very diverse city. And I think one of the common misconceptions or mistruths is that we're a suburban market and we're not diverse. And so when they come here and they actually take a look at it, they realize that Frisco is actually a very diverse community. And that kind of feels like home from global markets. Sports City USA, this is one we cover. Obviously, when they start to get very granular, they're looking at now lifestyle. Okay, so you have all the costs, all the business metrics sound really good. Now I have to recruit my talent, and what am I gonna tell them about what kind of place it's like to live here? What's there to do, and how do they, their kids are gonna go to great schools, but then what do they do on the weekend, and how do they engage in the community? So we talk about number one best place to raise an athlete is a huge accolade for us. 9 professional collegiate sports teams and organizations. Their children and the talent has the opportunity to not only enjoy those world-class sports facilities, but if your child is in Frisco ISD, they also get to practice and play on those sports facilities, which is pretty phenomenal too. And then 12 times the national average of professional athletes. So being in a community where you're able to, the Cowboys and the FC Dallas soccer players and all of those people not only, call it home, but they practice and they work and they play and they shop. And that's a pretty phenomenal number for them as well. we start digging even deeper into quality of life. Now they're trying to understand where are they gonna buy a home, what's life like here. And as I mentioned, these are just those accolades that we mentioned, happiest city though, right? And that has a lot to do with education, wealth, access to jobs, opportunity. Safest city in America, this one, as we've mentioned with Chief Stevens, has been a phenomenal sell for us, and there's just a lot of interest from those coastal cities where there's been a lot of obviously heavy crime. Fastest growing city in the last decade, this is huge because of that future talent pipeline. So not only have we been growing exponentially, but we're gonna continue to grow into the next 5 to 10 years. There's gonna be rapid growth, not just within Frisco, but all of the new communities and cities popping up around us, Aubrey, Melissa, Salina, Prosper, Murphy, Wiley. There's a number of new communities and new residents that will continue to move in and feed that pipeline. Number one best place to buy a house, obviously if you're leaving New York or California, you're gonna be looking at purchasing a home, and to have that is really important. We dive much deeper into home criteria for them and show snapshots of Frisco. The homes are beautiful, so we have a lot of great photos to share. And then you at number 6 cities that millennials are moving to. The average age in the US is 38. The average age in Frisco is 37. So we're very much a millennial community, and that feels like home for that workforce that they're trying to attract. And then obviously top 10 best cities to move to for diversity and happiest city. So that's just a snapshot of what we kind of talk about, and then there's much more. They obviously ask questions and they want more data backing that. And then we just talk about lifestyle, right? We dive deeper into 49 master planned parks, so the outdoors, that quality of life, the walkability, as Jason mentioned, all of those amenities. If you think of yourself as talent, or even as executives that want to bring their talent back into the office or want to provide this friendly workplace environment, these are all things that they're also selling and pitching to them too, and trying to get them to kind of come back into the office. Museums, public art, we have the largest outdoor display in Texas of public art right here in Hall Park, which is great for the businesses looking. Cultural festivals, events, things to do around the community, we go much more deeper and we provide a vision with a lot of imagery to kind of show them what life is like here and really sell them for their talent. Any questions on that? That is essentially the pitch deck of all of the components. So then we ask, as a C-suite executive, when they get our pitch, and then they go and do this in Dallas. I was doing this in Dallas. They go and do it in Plano. Plano's Economic Development Organization gives them their pitch. They go and do it in Irving. They maybe go to Phoenix and look at Phoenix. It's a perfect time for a break. So then we ask them, obviously, at the end of it, you know, how do you feel about Frisco? And because one of the first questions oftentimes when they come in is, how is Frisco different from Plano? How is it different from Dallas? They know Dallas is the brand, right? So Dallas has a pretty easy sell. And as we go through this, at the end, we ask, you know, what do you think about Frisco and how is Frisco different? And it's very different. It's very different, right? The experience, and they've already at this point have already maybe toured some real estate. They've already been out in the community. They quietly, executives quietly come in and will play golf with, you know, other executive friends. They'll look and tour the community. They'll go shopping. They'll spend time here. They'll go to museums long before we actually sit at the table with them and give a pitch. And the response is always, it's very different. It's very different than the welcome that we received in Plano. It's very different than the welcome we received in Dallas. And so we take a lot of pride in that welcome and that kind of hospitality and that showcase. Any questions?
Yeah, so I love the pitch, and obviously Frisco is awesome.
Yay.
If there was one thing, your magic one, you could say, hey, I wish I could pitch this as a strength, but we don't have it today. Maybe we could have it in the future. You know what that would be?
One thing that, yes, exactly, and it goes back to the question of maybe why we lose sometimes. It's walkability. Walkability is not at the level where it needs to be. When we lose, and if we lose, it's typically to walkability, and because it's that amenity, right? The talent wants to be able to live, work, and play. And when we lose those deals, we lose to places like Uptown, which has a 98% walkability score. I think we were at mid-50s, 40s, and it's slowly climbing. as things like Hall Park revive themselves and build, you know, now the park and the open space and the hotel and the arts. So we're leading in some of that new design, but it's really the amenities for the talent, and the talent is demanding that work feels more like home, and that work feels more open, and that there's more collaborative spaces. So we're hoping things like, obviously the Star is a big selling point in Frisco Station. We just met with them recently. They're getting ready to kind of kickstart some of that new concepting. And when they do, and actually there's a rendering behind you, yeah. So if you look at the parks and trails that they're building in urban living. So really it's the mixed use development. We need more of it. We need more of that walkability. They look for the density. They're also coming from very dense climates, right? And so they want a little bit of that in the development. And that's
Was Toyota, that wouldn't have been a factor, the walkability for the Toyota loss, right?
the corporate campus still has, so they'll either build, Fortunes will look at building a big corporate sprawling campus or a tower like TIAA. And it's just gonna depend on the culture of the company. Toyota is a North American headquarters and a Fortune 500, 4,000 employees. They went, you know, horizontal. TIAA went vertical, and they wanted the walkability. So it's just going to depend if they want more of a corporate campus or if they want the urban environment.
Yeah, walkability is still about the amenities.
Yes.
Toyota still wanted the amenities that weren't close enough for them, for their employees, for their entertainment.
Gotcha. Yeah, I work right next door to them, so that's why I was asking the question, because it's certainly not walkable. But I understand the corporate campus concept, so yeah.
Yeah.
Lori, what about the affordability? So on your target chart, right, you have the high-tech space,
Yeah.
high income, but you also have a lot of service sectors as
Mhm.
well, right? So what about that mix of talent and ability? Can Frisco offer that?
Yes, that is a really good question, and that is one that we are very honest. So Collin County's average wage is $76,000, and that is way higher than Dallas, which is sitting still about probably 68. Tarrant County is even much lower because it's heavy industrial. It's more in the, I would say, upper 50s. And so when they are considering maybe Irving, which is Dallas County, and it's a lower, and they're looking at us, and they're realizing I'm gonna have to pay a little bit higher to attract the talent and also to provide that quality of life. That is an honest conversation we have with them, and Jason will tell you, sometimes we tell the company, you're probably gonna really struggle to find the workforce at that price point. We're still much more cost effective, sorry. But we have a very honest conversation that, we are a premier product, is what we're selling, right? Frisco is a premier product. That quality of life is something that you have to pay for. And it's gonna take a little bit more, and our board even, you know, when we bring projects back, if the salary's much lower than that 76,000 threshold, the board will not lean in, and sometimes the board will not approve because it's just not gonna be a good fit. And oftentimes you'll see them if they really, really wanna be in Frisco and they wanna pay for a prime product and they're coming out of somewhere pretty expensive, they'll lift a little bit in terms of salary. But more and more the affordability is a question that we do get. So these mixed use developments are helpful in that too, to offer, so if you're not ready to buy a home, there's some urban living concepts for you as well.
Yeah, and that 76,000 doesn't mean every job has to have that. When you talked about service, what you're talking about is people who may have certain experience or that may be kind of paying less than that as entry level or, you know, early in their career. So that 76,000 basically is a combined average of all of the jobs a company's gonna have.
Right.
So if it really weighs and skews on the lower side, that's where we get concerned. If we know that there's some, that's great, but we try to make sure there's enough in the middle of the top side in order to make sure the project's successful.
Gloria, I have a question.
Yes.
So when you're looking at competition locally, like when the companies come in, are you guys aware of the national level of competition, like Toyota had 4 other companies?
Yes. Yes.
Are you like in competition with that? How do you find that out?
They'll put that typically in the request for proposal, the request for information. They'll say considering Dallas, Fort Worth, Phoenix, Arizona, and Miami, Florida, or Atlanta, Georgia. And then that is helpful because then when we're pitching, we're able to say, sure, Miami's cool, and sure, you know, Atlanta's great, but you're gonna relocate in Alpharetta, which where all the corporate campuses are, and that's an hour from the airport. Would you like to spend that extra hour sitting in your first class seat, or in traffic waiting to get there, because you'll get there in 20 minutes, 25, 30 minutes from here.
Yeah.
So we're able to align ourselves competitively, and the pitch gets much more direct to the competitors that we're working with. And Emily does a phenomenal job in the marketing decks as well as our research team. Once we know that, we keep track of all these projects in Salesforce, and we're able to plug in all of those components, and make sure that when we're pitching, we're talking about who else that they've seen.
Okay, guys, sorry, I'm gonna cut it off for now, just because we're kind of way past where we're supposed to be. We blocked in a good 30+ minutes at the end for Q&A, but since we've done that organically as we've gone